In 2023, it was discovered that Alien Resurrection had a secret cheat code that allowed players to play pirated PS1 games without the need for a mod chip when entered. It was left in by mistake and not uncovered for 23 years. I'm Jimmy for Cultured Vultures, and here are 99 other facts about the original PlayStation you may not know. In the original Metal Gear Solid, if Snake meets Meryl without yet picking up the SOCOM pistol, he will simply hold his hand on the barrel of her rifle. Meryl Silverberg, or at least Meryl in another universe, actually originated in Policenauts, a 1994 Kojima adventure game that never got officially released in the West. She even seems to be wearing Dave's jacket at the end of MGS, who was her partner in Policenauts. Solid Snake's chosen name is even David. Metal Gear Solid has a few other nods to Kojima's earlier work, but they are not explicitly connected. The main theme for Metal Gear Solid, composed by Tapi Iwase, was accused of borrowing motifs from a song called Winter Road by Russian composer Georgy Sviridov. Hideo Kojima was even confronted by the Russian games magazine Igromania with the apparent original version of the song on a PlayStation Portable. Nothing came of this, but the theme hasn't been used since Snake Eater to avoid any potential issues. The plot of Metal Gear Solid was originally followed up with a non-canon audio drama sequel that aired weekly in Japan on Nippon Cultural Broadcasting and focuses on Snake, Campbell, Meryl and Mei Ling as they go off on hijinks. Shuyo Murata, who would later direct the Guy Savage minigame in Metal Gear Solid 3 that originally planned to become its own game, directed the series and worked with Kojima up until The Phantom Pain for Metal Gear as a writer, and also helped write Death Stranding. An English fan-translated version of the series is currently available on YouTube. While Metal Gear Solid is seen as the godfather of 3D stealth, Tenchu Stealth Assassins actually came out 7 months before it and had ledge hanging, a feature that wouldn't turn up in Metal Gear until Metal Gear Solid 2 on the PS2. Similarly, while most people assume that the Rumble Pack was the first mainstream implementation of controller rumble, the dual analog actually technically did it first, as it came out a couple of days before the Rumble Pack in Japan. The rumble was removed in the dual analog when it came to the West, then introduced again for the DualShock's release. Why are PS1 cases so much bigger in PAL regions? Well, PAL manuals needed to reprint everything for multiple languages, and so they were too chunky for a typical PS1 NTSC dual case. Some Japanese cases are a similar fatness to PAL due to a lack of uniformity early on, with Namco in particular seemingly using their unbranded fat cases over here too. Polyphony Digital used to be called Polis, and they released 2 games before Gran Turismo, the Japan-exclusive Motortoon Grand Prix, the first game ever published by Sony, and its sequel that was released in PAL and NA2. From the start of development in 1992, Gran Turismo took 5 years to make, which is just over half a Concorde, and director Kazunori Yamauchi has been quoted as saying that he was only at home for 4 days each year. That sacrifice paid off though, as Gran Turismo is the highest rated first-party game on the PS1 with a Metacritic score of 96, while the lowest is Twisted Metal Small Brawl with 51. Honestly, I had no idea that game even existed, but it did come out on the PS1 in 2001 exclusively in America. However, across both major review aggregators, the lowest rated Sony published game is The Fifth Element, with it only managing a 32% on game rankings. Sony published the game in PAL territories. In America, it was published by Activision. Fib Ribbon, which never came to America, would create custom levels based on the music CDs that you inserted into the console after you took the game disc out. The game kept working as it was loaded directly onto the console's RAM. On a similar note, a lot of PS1 discs like Alien Trilogy, Tekken 3 and Tomb Raider can also be played on a CD player to hear their soundtracks. You can even easily do this on a PlayStation 3. Talking of banger soundtracks, Wipeout actually came to the Sega Saturn in 1996, despite developers Psygnosis being owned by Sony since 1993. Psygnosis had some independence from Sony despite the takeover, seemingly thanks to a loophole which irked Sony to the point where they tried to sell them starting around July 1996, not long after the release of Wipeout on Saturn. The original prototype design for the PS1 controller was actually more in line with the design of Sega's controllers, and the earliest PS1 dev kits reportedly had this controller. Check out the uniform colours on those shape buttons, weird. Naughty Dog originally jokingly called Crash Bandicoot Sonic's ass game, as they conceptualised playing a platformer game like Sonic the Hedgehog from behind the character while looking at his sweet cheeks the whole time. Most of the male voices you hear in Crash's PS1 games, including Crash himself, were performed by Brendan O'Brien, whose father was Edmund O'Brien, a character actor who was neighbours with Harry Houdini. Brendan's last new performance as Crash was for Crash Bash, but Naughty Dog reused his voice work for their remake of the first game within Uncharted 4. Brendan O'Brien actually based the voice of Neo Cortex on the voice of Edmund.
The other one begins with an N. That was the one that, you know, the one that's the, he will be my Bandicoot and he will do this. That guy is based on my dad.
No way.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me?
Brendan and Edmund appeared together for an episode of a 70s show called The Streets of San Francisco. Edmund O'Brien passed away on May 9th, 1985 at the age of 69 on Brendan's 23rd birthday, while Brendan O'Brien sadly passed away in March 2023 at just 60. His obituary was first posted on what would have been his 61st birthday. According to Naughty Dog's Andy Gavin, a PS1 dev unit would cost developers a not insignificant $35,000 in 1994. Adjusted for inflation, that's more than $70,000 today. Maybe Naughty Dog should have waited for Netgear Rose to launch in the West in 1997 for a cool $750. The mail order unit would allow budding developers to get their foot in the door with game dev, and devs' finished work would often be included on demo discs bundled with the official UK PlayStation magazine for the next 7 years. The February 1999 edition of official UK PlayStation magazine included a beat-by-beat recap of Metal Gear Solid's whole story before it was even released in the UK, just 3 pages into its 9-page review. Why did they do this? While the official PlayStation magazine for the US would include PS1 demo discs up until its 54th incarnation in March 2002, the UK version would get 108 different PS1 demo discs and run until March 2004. The final ever demos included Crash Bash and Vib Ribbon, as well as 20 Netgear Rose games, the most ever put to one disc. The disc itself is extremely hard to find. Last magazine fact for you for now, the official PlayStation magazine in some capacity would run in the US until December 2012, but the UK edition would last almost another decade until it was relaunched as the Resurrected Play in June 2021. Americans, if you're bitter about us getting Vib Ribbon and a magazine for longer, at least you got the first Parasite Eve over there. The original game never came to Europe, but bizarrely enough, we did get the second game. However, PAL did also, weirdly enough, not get games like Brave Fencer Musashi, Bushido Blade 2, Chrono Trigger, Chrono Cross, Einhander, Final Fantasy Tactics, and, most upsettingly of all, 101 Dalmatians 2, Patch's London Adventure, which is set in the UK and based on a British novel. Our Queen didn't die for this, you hear me? That forgotten masterpiece came out as late as 2003 on the PS1, but the OG PlayStation got games way up until 2006 in Japan. Strider Hiryu was the last game released for the console on October 24th, 2006. However, this was just a re-release of an arcade game that had already been ported in 2000 in a compilation. The actual last new game ever released for the PS1 is a bit more confusing. Some believe that it was Morhen X, for PAL in July 2005, but if you look up its serial number, you will see that it seems to have actually come out on May 20th, 2004. From my research, Snappy 3 Fun Games, released exclusively in Germany on March 1st, 2005, is the final new PS1 game ever released. PAL stays winning. You may know that 102.49 million original PlayStation consoles were sold, but what you may not know is that 2.77 million of those PlayStations were shipped as late as 2004, an entire decade after the console's original launch, and still more than the combined sales of the 3DO and Atari Jaguar, though the 3DO doing a lot of heavy lifting there. This console may look like the Netgear Rose, but in fact it's one of only 100 special PS1 units given away to celebrate the PS1 reaching 10 million units being manufactured, with a special label on the underside to go with the lovely midnight blue hue. They pop up very rarely for sale, and you can expect to be paying quite the premium whenever they do. You are never getting this one though. A gold, not solid gold, but plastic gold model of the smaller PS1 was given to VIPs, including Minecraft's Notch, to invite them to attend Sony's E3 2013, and makes different sounds when you hit the power button, though the unit unfortunately doesn't play any games. Speaking of things that don't quite play right, William Shakespeare is an unlockable skin in Medal of Honor's multiplayer mode when you enter the cheat code Payback, with Joan of Arc and Napoleon being unlockable in the second game, Underground. Medal of Honor was developed by DreamWorks Interactive, who were originally founded by DreamWorks, the film studio, and Microsoft. Medal of Honor's massive budget incurred massive losses during production, which is partly to blame for DreamWorks Interactive being sold to Electronic Arts. The sale was already started before Medal of Honor then turned a massive profit. Also from DreamWorks Interactive, The Lost World Jurassic Park featured a secret cutscene when you unlocked all collectibles that featured Jeff Goldblum telling you to go outside and get laid.
Call a member of the opposite sex, you know what I'm talking about.
Tai-Fu, yet another game made by DreamWorks Interactive, was made using the same engine as The Lost World Jurassic Park. He definitely gets more tail than you. The Lost World, Tai-Fu, and Medal of Honor's soundtracks were composed by Michael Giacchino, who you may know as the composer for Lost and the section in Up that ruined you emotionally for the rest of time, as well as being the director of Werewolf by Night. Speaking of furry bipeds, Bloody Roar was originally called Beasterizer when it launched in American arcades in July 1997, before hitting the original PlayStation in November 1997 as Bloody Roar. Bloody Roar 2 had a blood-soaked American Werewolf in London inspired advert that allegedly aired on Fox Kids back in the day. The advert starred JP Manu, who you may know as the Doppeldiener in Community and as the voice of Kuchko in Emperor's New School. On the topic of 2000s animation, a video game adaptation of Titan AE was planned for the PS1 and was even mentioned in the end credits for the movie. However, due to the film's financial failure, the game was cancelled. You can, however, find a demo disc or the files from that demo dumped online. It's not great. Yeah, it's not great. Though nowhere near as prevalent as in this current generation. Sheesh, the PS1 did get some games that also came to PS2. Alone in the Dark, The New Nightmare, Rayman 2, Harry Potter 1 and 2, Monsters Inc., Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 and 4, and Disney's Treasure Planet are just some games that came to both consoles. Can you name any others? Drop them in the comments. There are also quite a lot of PS2 games that were envisaged for PS1 but came to PS2 instead, including Eco, with development starting in 1997 before switching to the PlayStation 2 in around 2000. Eco may not have had such a massive influence if it released on the original PlayStation, with Dark Souls not possible without its impact according to Hidetaka Miyazaki himself. From Software were no stranger to the PS1 themselves, and did try to make a PS1 version of the largely forgotten PS2 game Evergrace before they decided to abandon it at 50% completion. A 50% complete version of Onimusha on PS1 was also scrapped when Capcom saw the potential of the PS2. The game was even planned to release for the doomed N64 DD. Footage of the game is available online, but a playable build has yet to pop up anywhere. The BDSM-focused 4-player Thrill Kill was also Kill on the PlayStation when its publisher changed from Virgin to EA, who decided not to release it. The game was effectively reskinned and turned into Wu-Tang Shaolin style, or the much cooler sounding Wu-Tang Taste the Pain in PAL regions. Its developer, Paradox, eventually became Midway Studios LA and made Mortal Kombat Shaolin Monks one of the most beloved MK games ever made. The infamous Superman 64 was also planned to release on PS1, with a Blue Sky Software, who you may remember from Vector Man and Evil Zone, basically remaking it for the PS1. However, the license expired and the chance at redemption was cancelled. A build for the 2000 prototype exists on the Internet Archive. Resident Evil 2 also effectively had to be remade, with Shinji Mikami unhappy with the boring gameplay and locations as the project neared the 60% completion line. An unfinished fan-patched build of the game, dubbed Resident Evil 1.5, is readily available online, with Leon S. Kennedy still a playable character, but Elza Walker takes the place of Claire Redfield. An Elza costume can be bought for Claire in the 2019 Resident Evil 2 remake. The infamously bad voice acting in Resident Evil 1 that I will save you from hearing from the 1,000,000th time was due to poor direction from the Japanese-speaking Capcom to the English-speaking cast of freelancers who didn't even know what they were recording for, with many of them recording a lot of lines for a lot of different games and other media in bulk. The voice of Albert Wesker, Pablo Kuntz, did not even realise he had a part in the game until 25 years later, after fans noticed his voice in a YouTube video showcasing a Japanese sword was similar to Wesker's. The now non-canon novelisation of the first game, The Umbrella Conspiracy by S.D. Perry, adds a new character called Trent, who initially gives Jill information about the Spencer mansion, but is later revealed to be the person who saves Wesker from the mansion as it's exploding. Quick aside, the novelisation for Nemesis is an absolute banger, by the way, give that a read. Speaking of explosive, Resident Evil was re-released at least twice, if you're discounting the Platinum, of course, once as Director's Cut, then again as Director's Cut DualShock version, with the latter having an infamous soundtrack by the deaf composer Mamoru Samaguchi. Well, that beautiful soundtrack, along with Onimusha and every other piece credited to him, was actually ghost-written by Takashi Nagaki over almost 2 decades. Nagaki also revealed that Samaguchi's hearing was far better than believed, and he couldn't even write musical notation. Nagaki would probably like to give back the writing credit for Resident Evil though. I mean, Samaguchi probably did actually do that one, right? The makers of Bubsy 3D would also probably like to go back to a time before they saw Super Mario 64 at a CES ahead of release. Upon seeing the soon-to-be groundbreaking Nintendo 64 game, Michael Berlin instructed his co-developer to go back to the drawing board and somehow try to match the technology and techniques of Super Mario 64 with a fraction of the team and budget. It did not work. One of the lowest scoring reviews for Bubsy 3D was from EGM, who gave the game a 3.25 out of 10. However, this didn't stop the game's publisher from putting a cut up and jumbled quote from the game's preview, not review, preview in EGM on the game's box art. You just kind of gotta appreciate that kind of hustle, really. Another rightfully critically panned PS1 game, the tie-in for The Fifth Element, was made on the Nightmare Creatures engine and was also developed by Callisto, but the Activision and Sony published game sadly did not see Bruce Willis return to voice Corbin. Bruce Willis did lend his voice and likeness to Activision and Neversoft's Apocalypse from 1998, though. Poe, a popular 90s alternative act, lends her music to the soundtrack and also appears as Plague, one of the horsemen of the, Apocalypse. Poe would actually largely disappear from the limelight for 20 years before appearing again on the soundtrack for Alan Wake 2 with brand new music. Thanks to this commenter for getting the neurons firing here. System of a Down's music video for War, which is in my top 3 System songs ever, also appeared on an in-game billboard in Apocalypse. Bruce Willis wasn't actually intended to portray the main role in Apocalypse and was instead supposed to be the player's sidekick. However, when they realised that Bruce was going to have to be involved a lot more as the sidekick. They basically gave him the Venom Kiefer treatment and made him the man who doesn't say very much actually. And finally, to close out the Bruce Willis era of this video, yes, I'm sad too, Die Hard Trilogy was actually banned in Germany for all of the violence, the dying and the harding. Apocalypse, despite the last boss being the satanic president of the United States, was alright. They just had to make the blood blue instead, like a lot of violent games on PS1. Alright, fine, you asked for it, he's back. One more Bruce Willis adjacent fact. Neversoft were nearly bankrupt when they decided to take over development for Activision on Apocalypse, and then they reworked the Apocalypse engine to make a little game you might know called Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. Bruce Willis was an unlockable character in Tony Hawk's Pro... not really, no, but we do have the next best thing, a K-pop band called Thin KL, like Howard, were unlockable characters for the Korean PC version of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. The creator of the Christ Air, Christian Hosoi, actually became a born-again Christian after a 4-year incarceration and is now an ordained pastor who started a skateboard ministry for young people called The Sanctuary. Rockstar originally wanted to partner with Tony Hawk for a game, but the Hawkman went with Activision instead. Rockstar then turned to Thrasher magazine, and the Z-Axis developed Thrasher Presents Skate and Destroy was born in 1999. Funniest thing though, Activision bought Z-Axis in May 2002 after they made Video Game Heritage. In the UK, the first Tony Hawk game is called Tony Hawk's Skateboarding because it was believed people were more familiar with ice skating. The Japanese GBA port of Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 also changes the name to Skate. Tony Hawk No Pro Skater 2. Skate? Yeah. Spider-Man is in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 as an unlockable character, and Tony Hawk himself was allegedly set to appear in the first Spider-Man game on PS1, also developed by Neversoft. Instead of the Hawkster himself on the level Building Top Chase, there is a billboard to promote Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2. Spidey will even acknowledge it when you get close. Spider-Man himself is voiced by Rino Romano, reprising his role from Spider-Man Unlimited, but you may also know him as Luis Serra from Resident Evil 4. He was most recently heard giving Mario and Luigi grief in the Super Mario movie. If you try to enter a swear word as a cheat code in Spider-Man, Spidey will pop up and censor it with a fist. Neversoft also worked on a Ghost Rider game for 6 months in 1996 for Crystal Dynamics, but the project was cancelled, setting them down the road to approach Activision for Apocalypse. I promise we're not going back to the Bruce Willis era. Quick bonus fact for you though, Ghost Rider can very briefly be seen in the What If mode for Spider-Man. One of the founders of Neversoft, Mick West, retired from making games in 2003 and now dedicates his time to debunking conspiracy theories. One of the most prevalent conspiracy theories or myths on the PS1 was Nude Raider, which is something you will have to use your imagination to figure out, just like you did before the internet existed. Many believe that the developers of the Tomb Raider games, Core Design, started a practical joke by releasing a supposed nude cheat to games magazines that was actually the self-destruct cheat, but it seems like some games mags were just in on the April Fool's joke as well. However, Paul Douglas, one of the developers responsible for the first Tomb Raider game, did actually confirm in a 2006 interview with VideoGameDesign.com that his boss had asked the team to put a nude code in, but they refused. Lara Croft was originally a Latin American mercenary by the name of Laura Cruz, but the name was changed when the team realised that Americans had a tough time saying it. Me too. She became Lara Cruz and then Lara Croft when her surname was picked from a phone book to sound British. While often seen as a PlayStation icon, Lara Croft actually first made her debut on the Sega Saturn in October 1996 after Sega bought a super brief exclusivity window, with her coming to the PS1 in November 1996. Just before they went deep in the Tomb Raider content mines, Core Design also found time to make Fighting Force, which was originally pitched to Sega as a potential Streets of Rage 4. Sega obviously declined, and we didn't get Streets of Rage 4 until 2020. Even though they were in direct competition with Sony, Sega published the Japan exclusive Puyo Puyo Sun in 1997 on the PlayStation themselves. They would also exclusively release Minimono Shakuto Tambourine Dapion on the PS1 in 2002, though they had already left the console business in 2001. The original Kingsfield is also still exclusive to Japan, and the game that we got in the West is actually technically Kingsfield 2. Clock Tower 2 The Struggle Within is also technically just a spin-off game called Ghost Head. Remember Motortoon Grand Prix 2? Well, that also released in the US as just Motortoon Grand Prix. Parasite Eve, Squaresoft's insanely brilliant horror RPG that I'm not bitter about at all, is actually a sequel to a Japanese novel released in 1995 that became a movie in 1997. The novel wasn't officially translated into English until 2005. Final Fantasy VII was originally planned as another 2D game for the SNES, but when Squaresoft switched to 3D, they realised that only CD-ROM could support it, ending their long partnership with Nintendo, who were planning on sticking with carts for the N64. A new partnership with Sony was born. According to Tetsuya Nomura, early versions of Final Fantasy VII's script by Hironobu Sakaguchi were more like a detective story, with the action centering around a character called Hot-Blooded Detective Joe as he chases down the main characters in Avalanche who blow up Midgar, the scamps. Tetsuya Nomura also said in an interview for The Bouncer that Squall's appearance in Final Fantasy VIII was based off of River Phoenix, Joaquin Phoenix's brother who starred in Stand By Me and My Own Private Idaho. River passed away in 1993 at just 23. The financial fallout from the catastrophic failure of Final Fantasy The Spirits Within led to Square not being able to back Xenogears 2, according to Hirohide Sugiura, Monolith Soft president. Unexpected Jimmy fact, The Spirits Within made me cry when I saw it at the cinema. Not as much as Vagrant Story not getting a sequel though, but did you know that Vagrant Story is set in the same world as Final Fantasy Tactics and 12? Ivalice was created by Yasumi Matsuno, who also created Tactics and started development on 12. Vagrant Story's focus on the corruptive nature of power and hierarchy makes it one of the best games on the PS1. Apropos of absolutely nothing, the UK's Prince's Trust joined with Sony to release a paid demo disc called Power Source in 1997, which featured playable demos, a Netgear Rose tutorial, and information on how to enter the PlayStation Challenge, a Prince's Trust competition where two winners would receive the funding to help them make their own video game idea. There were other charitable team-ups on the PS1 too. In 1996, a compilation featuring Circle of Blood, Mist, and Road Rash was released to aid children's charities. A similar compilation features Toka Touring Car Championship, Tomb Raider 1, WWF Warzone, and Ridge Racer Revolution. The compilation, which originally sold for just £20 when it launched in 2001, is now so difficult to find that we genuinely have no idea how much it would cost. Also in 2001, really sorry for this segue, Siphon Filter 3's original cover was changed following 9/11 to focus less on the American flag. PAL copies simply removed the American flag, but NTSC copies were changed to this horrible thing instead. Copies of the original design were manufactured, but they were recalled from retailers before release on September 25th, though some did still get out and now go for super high prices. Suikoden was also changed from its Japanese release, with a crucifixion scene altered for Western territory so that it wouldn't be quite so on the nose. Buster Groove, which is known as Buster Move in Japan but Groove in the West due to the Puzzle Bobble series being called Bust a Move Here, was also censored in the West to alter specific lyrics that start with a specific letter between M and O that I really cannot be specific about. If you really want to play through those tracks yourself, grab a Japanese copy of Buster Groove, one of the earliest models of the PS1, any PAL game, and a pen, and you can get around the region block for any game or even use a burned disc pretty easily by quickly swapping discs around. It really was that easy. Feel like swapping your perfectly fine DualShock for a Frank Herbert nightmare? the ASCII Sphere 360 has your back. The special ball was designed for flight and spaceship games and actually kinda worked okay back in the day apparently. It's a conversion of a PC accessory named the Space Orb 360, with the PS1 conversion being handled by ASCII, an American company later known as Age Tech, who published a lot of From Software's earliest games, as well as Clock Tower 2, The Struggle Within. If you struggled with the torture scene in Metal Gear Solid, you really could have done with the Japan-only Takara Game of Life controller. Mainly for use with a video game adaptation of a board game, the controller had a wheel that would allegedly repeatedly spam circle when pressed, though it may also just solely work with Game of Life. Guess I gotta do a video on it just to be sure. Video CD might not have had a glorious life and it might have mainly been popular in Asia, but you could watch video CDs on one model of PS1, the extremely rare SCPH-5903. VCDs were about the same quality as VHS, and while they lost a lot of their popularity once DVDs became more available, you can still get VCDs for movies like Chilgin Hipsis in some countries. If a video CD had taken off in the West, we may have been able to watch Simon Pegg play Resident Evil 2 on PS1 on our PS1.
Don't sneak up on me like that!
Ooh. Want a cup of tea?
Yes.
Creating this episode of Spaced convinced Simon Pegg and director Edgar Wright to make the iconic Shaun of the Dead. Spaced also had a scene where Tim and Daisy squabble in the middle of Daisy playing Tekken 3, with the argument ending up with Daisy as the winner in typical Tekken fashion.
Daisy Steiner wins.
All three Tekken games on the PS1 run at 60 FPS. Following Tekken's success, Namco wanted to experiment with weapons for a new game, Soul Edge, which became Soul Blade in the West, the first entry in the Soul Calibur franchise. What you may not know is that when you use the PlayStation's multi-tap, the game actually has a crazy first-person option. What am I looking at? X-Men Mutant Academy 2, also made by the guys behind Thrill Kill, featured a secret pool party mode where every X-Men would rock up in their finest swimwear, and then there's Wolverine wearing his cursed cut-off jorts. The only thing more cursed: Star Wars Masters of Teros Kasi, which could have been made by Capcom, but LucasArts declined and Capcom made Star Gladiator instead. This is LucasArts' second stupidest decision ever. It's maybe not as stupid as making a dinosaur fighting game though, even if it's actually a bit rad. Warpath Jurassic Park was another Jurassic Park game published by our old friends at DreamWorks Interactive, with another old friend, Michael Giacchino, doing the soundtrack here. Giacchino would later compose Jurassic World. The developers, Black Ops Entertainment, would go on to make the culturally foundational America's 10 Most Wanted. Nobody really wanted to make Die Hard Trilogy 2 Viva Las Vegas for Fox Interactive, with the original developers passing on the project and N-Space, the guys who would later develop the also culturally foundational Geist, making a brand new story. The original developers would later play the sequel and were a bit upset and depressed in case anyone thought we'd been involved. Ouch. Argonaut could have been a bit depressed when Nintendo rejected their pitch to make a Yoshi game, but they went ahead and turned it into the legendary Croc series instead, published again by Fox Interactive. The last game Fox Interactive would independently publish, The Simpsons Wrestling, actually featured cameos from Leela and Bender from Futurama in E3 2000 footage, but they were replaced with generic aliens before the game came out. Boo. Finally, at 100, speaking of aliens, Alien Resurrection on the PS1, also developed by our friends at Argonaut, actually featured a replica of the Atom Zone cabinet briefly featured in the movie created for the movie by Argonaut, which was originally intended to become its own game. I don't think you can play burned discs on this one though. Ugh, outro gang, we did it, that was a big boy. Only about 40% of our viewers or so make it to the end of our videos, so if you're one of those 40%, just comment "I made it, hark" down below in honour of William Shakespeare, the best skin in Medal of Honor, and I will get you a free Steam key. I've been Jimmy for Cultured Vultures. It's been good to have you, and thank you for watching.